When I was speaking about the definition of resilience, I mentioned two types: chronic stresses and acute shocks, which are really like trying to describe the nature of the challenges that we face. So shocks are sudden, sharp events that disrupt normal functioning, like natural disasters or terrorist attacks, or cyber attacks. And these are immediate, high-impact events that require urgent response. On the other hand, stresses are long-term challenges that weaken the fabric of our society over time. For instance, could be chronic water shortages, could be poverty, ongoing political instability, could be inequality. These issues erode our cities, our towns, our regions, and even countries' ability to be resilient gradually. So just in terms of really familiarizing this concept, if we think about our human body, a stress that our human body can face could be something that's more chronic and that's more longer and weakening the fabrics of our body. It could be malnutrition, so where you're not getting enough nutrients, which is leading you to becoming weaker over time, losing weight, and potentially even becoming more stunted in the growth. But then a shock could be like an immediate disease, like for instance, COVID-19, where your body is being attacked, you are in sudden pain and you're capable, you lose the capacity to do things very suddenly. So these shocks and stresses rarely happen separately. A system can experience both shocks and stresses at the same time. So shocks can exacerbate existing stresses, and conversely, long-term stresses can amplify the impact of shocks. So if we go back to our body as an example, most of us could be facing some form of stress. Doesn't have to be malnutrition, but maybe you're not sleeping well, you have stomach problems, you're feeling weak, you're having headaches because you're not drinking enough water. But then as you're experiencing things, so when these things can pile up, so when you experience a shock, such as a sudden cold or COVID-19, the impact you feel will be more increased and more exacerbated. Yeah, so your capacity to your system to withstand that can be eroded and can even lead to your body's collapse or your system's collapse. Our societies experience shocks and stresses in the same manner. So stresses such as unemployment, social unrest, malfunction in public transport, climate change can pile up upon each other. And then when a city experiences a shock, such as a major flood event, the damages can be even greater, especially to vulnerable populations who are experiencing these stresses every day and more explicitly. And it can also mean that our capacity to recover becomes even more delayed because of that. To give an example of how shocks and stresses interact, we can look at the current and more recent news that has been coming out of Nairobi around flooding and flood impacts. The floods in Nairobi have become even more catastrophic in their impact because of existing stresses like climate change, where there has been an increasing rains that the city has been experiencing, but also there's been rapid urbanization in the city where the population has surged significantly and infrastructure has not kept up, such as drainage systems are not adequate enough. There are also waste management issues that are blocking drains with solid waste, and there's also open sewers that are worsening the impact of floods. And related again to rapid urbanization, there is expansion of vulnerable settlements and informal neighborhoods that are being built more on floodplains because of the lack of other available land for people moving into the city, and again with limited infrastructure. And then the urban sprawl that is also being exacerbated because of rapid urbanization means that the surfaces that the city has are not absorbent. There are not enough green spaces. Mostly it's concrete. It's a concrete overload where water cannot seep in. So when these types of rains and floods happen, the capacity for the city to withstand them is more, it's weakened. So just because of these stresses that have been happening, we see that the impacts of these floods are increasing. For instance, for floods that happened last year in April, over 40,000 residents were displaced. There was an accessibility of roads, so mobility and transportation systems were disrupted, which in turn will disrupt economic activities. There was loss of life, of course, and emergencies. And then there was also increasing inequalities because there were some settlements that were built on floodplains that experienced severe damage due to these floods because they were not already designed or prepared to withstand. So in an ideal world, the shocks and the stresses that we face will happen one at a time, so we can respond and recover from it before the next crisis comes. But however, that's not really the reality that we're dealing with. We're dealing in an era of multiple issues and multiple crises. This is why thinking about resilience becomes imperative in today's world, because it's a vital response to these intertwined challenges that define our era. So I want to hear from you. What is a recent shock that you've experienced in your community that you would want to share with us? In the chat, I see Spiro saying rural urban wildfire that threatened settlements. Yes, and we're seeing these urban wildfires that are actually becoming more and more prevalent because of drier conditions due to climate change. I also see other comments, more rains causing flooding. Yes, I experienced that a lot in the city I live in, where when there are the rains are stronger than before, and then the capacity to really withstand these, they turn into floods, and the capacity for our city to really continue functioning afterwards has been quite difficult. I see food insecurity, which is, I think, more of a chronic stress that happens over time. And rapid urbanization is also a stress that happens also where I live in Addis Ababa. I see warmer temperatures, also stresses that are happening that are really chronically shifting how we experience the environment. And heat stress, yes, actually, we have been experiencing globally the hottest years in history, and the amount of heat waves people are experiencing across the globe have been drastically increasing. So I want to ask a second question. What is a stress that have made your experience of the shocks that you mentioned worse? So I see, for me, I mentioned there's been a lot of floods that I have been experiencing in our city over time. And one of the shocks that really makes these stresses difficult is that there's very limited transportation options. So when it rains and roads flood, means that my ability to move throughout really gets affected. And so it really does impact how I navigate where I live. I see long drought spells experienced last year in northern Ghana. Drought and heat have made, I see drought and heat making also wildfires even worse. There are seasonal raises of Lake Tanganyika. So the flooding that comes from these, the rising of lakes, weakens the coordination of regional government with early warning systems. So yes, in times of these types of stresses like heat waves or shocks like heat waves or flooding, the capacity to not be aware or to not share information, and that lack of coordination could really make the impacts worse, because people are not informed that this is an event that is coming and that they're not able to be prepared. Thank you so much.